Like I say, I'm Steve Keyser. I'd like to welcome everyone to New College Institute and the Martin Lacey Lecture Hall for our non-credit lecture on Philpott Lake Dam and the mystery below. By far, this is the largest lecture that we've ever had. I look back and I think we've had 52 of these. We were talking in a staff meeting yesterday, and moving forward, we would like to do some different things with it. So there will be a survey coming around since we have a nice large crowd and so many great people in here. It's sort of humbling to be up here because there's so many great people that have been in my life. So as that survey comes around, please fill it out and give me some input. There's a couple items that I need to discuss with you before we start. Restrooms are out the door and just down to the right. And like I said, there's a survey that will be passed around. Also, there will be books for sale. Nancy's book will be for sale, and it will be out in the lobby area near the receptionist desk. The reason for that, there's another event we need to set up for. So a bit about today's speaker, Nancy Bell. Nancy Bell lives on a great farm. I see pictures of it all the time. She's also a great photographer, and I see pictures of her farm, and it makes me want to go there all the time. She's a graduate of Radford College, which is now Radford University.
You just told everybody my age.
She is the director. Well, I remember last time you were here, you corrected. She is currently the director of United Way of Franklin County. She's formerly been a photojournalist for the Road Times. She's been a grant writer, a fundraiser. However, it's the good things that Nancy Bell does that really sets her apart as a community person. For example, she was named a Martinsville Citizen of the Year in 2004 for her outstanding work for the Boys and Girls Club. She was also involved in fundraising for the Virginia Museum of Natural History. Nancy is a mom, she's a wife, and she's also has been a co-worker and a great friend. And we welcome you forward to your next.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really blown away that so many people are here. This is awesome. Thank you. I hope this lives up to your expectations. I'd like to start with the disclaimer, and that is there are many people in this room who know more about life around Philpott than I do. I had some long conversations with some really interesting folks and made some really good friends, but there's still so much history that needs to be told. And I would like to also invite you to correct me if I get anything wrong. We have a lot of pictures here to look at and a lot of tales, and we've left out some tales we couldn't confirm. I'd love to be able to confirm some of those. Let me tell you just for a moment how this started out. I used to work at Dan River Basin Association. I still consider them my family. And we were approached to do a book about Philpott Lake from Arcadia Publishing. And since I was director of all other, it fell on my hands to do that. And so we put notices in the Franklin paper, the Martinsville paper, the Patrick County paper, and we said we're doing a book project. If you have pictures or stories, please contact us. And so the people who are in the book are the people who contacted us. There are many more, and I hope that with our Facebook page and with our DARPA website, we can continue to tell the story and continue to get people to clarify some of the history for us that we weren't able to fill in the gaps for. Long story short, Arcadia wanted the pictures that people were providing, and they wanted the originals. And I couldn't, in all good conscience, ask people to give me their precious family photos that they may never get back. And they complained about the quality. Well, we all know our family photos have bent corners, and they've been passed around a lot, and they're threadbare. And they became so picky about the photos, and this is just they're publishing, I'm not dishing them or anything, that we decided to self-publish this book. And that's where Tom Perry with Laurel Hill Publishing comes in. He's in the back of the room. He publishes regional books and lots of things from local authors. And so we were able to do this book in paperback form for a very low price. It's $9.99, $10. It's black and white. And all the proceeds of the book go to Dan River Basin Association so that they can keep the area clean and work with the Corps of Engineers to hold programs, environmental programs. So I can shamelessly promote this because all the proceeds go to the Dan River Basin Association. So that's sort of the history of how the project got started. Oops. This isn't my clicker, so bear with me. Everybody in here has probably seen this picture. Along the Smith River before the 1940s, this was a common occurrence whenever there was a hurricane or floodwaters up in the highlands. I believe that's the Fieldale Bridge. And this is the footbridge connecting the workforce to Bassett Industries. So from talking to the people that I was able to talk to, families were very isolated. They were large, and there wasn't any such thing as a neighborhood. Mills were gathering places when people came in to have their corn ground and so forth. The families would come in and there would be some catching up with relatives. We learned that life was hard during the Depression, as it was in many places, and some folks lived in cabins with newspaper for wallpaper to keep them warm. There were a lot of swimming holes around Philpott Lake where the kids would gather and jump off rocks and hang from rope swings. It sounded like a really fun time to be living in this area. Other occasions for getting together were corn shuckings, wheat thrashings, and church was very central. School wasn't convenient. Nothing was convenient. It's a very rugged territory, and converting to cars took longer in this area than in most areas. But the families were close-knit. Large families, 10, 11, 12 children, more in some cases. They had each other. Everybody had chores, but a lot of the family history was passed down from generation to generation. And that's why some of the people you're going to hear about today were able to share with us their memories of the area. And I say a day's catch was the evening meal, and look at the size of that log in that truck. Those were harvested for the furniture industry and to build homes and infrastructure for the city of Martinsville and surrounding areas. The top picture is a picture of a wheat thrashing, and that was provided by Charlie and Joanne Philpott. And in the bottom left corner is a schoolhouse that a Carter family moved into. They had so many children, they moved into the schoolhouse. Okay, so moving on. 1937 is kind of an important year. There was a historic flood then, and I don't remember the amount of damage done, but for that time in history, it was substantial. Businesses, loss of cattle and life. An 18-year-old was snatched from the banks of the river and drowned, 18-month-old, I'm sorry. Just really devastating, and it became really apparent around 1937 that we needed to do something. So, 1938 through 46, 6 different development plans were made, and the way I understand it, and Rocky, please correct me, this is where engineers and everybody comes around the table and says, what's going to be the best way to do this? And there are many types of dams that you can have. The one we have today is a concrete gravity dam. In 1946, the Federal Power Commission and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers decided that the concrete gravity dam was the best. And then in 48, they started building roads. Does anyone know where this is? Where is it, Louise? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Does it have a name? Union Bridge. No, this one's, I don't think. Oh, yeah, we're Ryan's Branch is. Ryan's Branch. Thank you. And then in 49, a contract is awarded and construction begins. And I have a timeline in the book that lists the name of the contractors and all of that for those of you who want to know that information. So the first concrete is poured in March 1950, and I just found this fascinating. If you're standing at Bassett Mirror and you look to the left, they actually had a quarry back there. And Charlie and Joanne Philpott took me out in their car and pointed out where some of this stuff was, and it really helped me to understand. They had to have a quarry nearby to mix the concrete. And then I wondered, how do you get the concrete poured when the thing is going up and up? And what they did is they had a little cableway and a track, and they wheeled it out to the middle where they needed to pour, and they pulled the bottom open, and the concrete fell into the forms until it reached to the top. That was the best way to do it then, and probably is the best way to do it now. This is one of my favorite pictures because it shows the water starting to fill up and cover some of the trees. So there were a couple of incidents during the dam building. In an earlier flash flood, some cranes and materials were washed away. And then in 1950, the Corps saw that it was going to happen again, so they redirected some of the water and so that construction wouldn't have to be delayed. And then in 1951, and this is something I never thought about until I met Joe Yeaman, who surveyed the lake area, the bodies from family cemeteries had to be moved to higher ground. And so if you're on 57, there's Shady Rest Cemetery. A lot of those graves have been moved there. I'm too far away from her. So construction begins. Look at this. Now this is a cofferdam, correct, Rocky? Where they channel the water around the construction area, sort of? I'm learning my dam terms as I've gone through this process. But you can see, yeah, that it required blasting rock, it required excavation, it required rerouting water, just a lot of things. This was a construction bridge. If you're standing where the visitor center is now and looking downstream, again, you can see the monoliths are being built section by section. I liken this to, it looks scattered like the water just came through, so I'm thinking this might have been after a heavy rain. Things are kind of scattered. It's a very early picture. Here's a picture of them pouring the concrete, and people came. This construction project required engineers and bricklayers and electricians and all kinds of people, so they came from all over the country to work on this dam with the various contractors. Here's another view. I mean, it was just very rustic. This is the guys working the inner workings, and I have many more pictures in the book, but I didn't want to be here all day showing the construction part. Standing from where the visitor center is today, it looks like they're standing right on the dam. You can get an idea of how things are going. Now, let me see if I can figure this out. This area, this road right here, is the bed of the old Fairdale Railroad that Dan LaPrade talks about a lot in his talks about Fairdale. And I didn't realize that until I got in the car and rode around with some folks and showed me. Here's an aerial view. You can see how the hill is all scarred up from the traffic coming back and forth. The loop right here would be where the visitor center is today. Still the construction bridge is down there. I put this again because it's my favorite picture. I just find that remarkable. And this is an early 50s style, I call it a kiosk, but it was an overlook type of thing. It's not there anymore, thankfully, because it's really ugly, I think. Okay, so let's get to the good part, the people and their stories. This is Eunice Kirkman. And let me find my notes on her. She can trace her Native American heritage back on both sides of her family. And she is actually a descendant of the Native Americans who lived at Bassett Mirror, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Here we go. She can claim her ancestry on both sides, and she was one of the first people in our area to use DNA testing to prove that. You know, you look at her now, she's 90 years old, and she still has black hair. And up until a few months ago, she was still working at the Patrick County Historical Society, and she still lives near Ferrystone Lake. She talked about her grandmother moving the native graves up to higher ground, and she also talked about early discrimination, where the census people declared you were either white or black. And if you were Native American, it was better to be classified white. So a lot of people in Patrick County actually took Native Americans in and claimed they were cousins. Many, many, many went to the Lynchburg area where tribes exist today, and some went to Oklahoma. They were shipped out. Douglas Belcher and I spent a lot of time together. This resident of Martinsville collects baskets, pottery, and photos from the Indians who used to live in our area. They were called Shara, the grass people, therefore the grass baskets. His is a fascinating story. He helped during the 70s and 80s with Richard P. Gravely Jr. excavating the area where Bassett Mara is now. And they found literally, let me get my numbers straight here. Well, it's in the book, 90,000 artifacts. So there was a significant settlement of Native Americans here, and they found Spanish trading beads that go back to the 1300s. So it really was, from an archaeological standpoint, very interesting. Doug is considered a local expert on the history of our Native Americans here, and there's a chapter in the book dedicated to that. These are some of the artifacts that were found here, and we have listed some in the book. And this is right there at Philpott, where Bassett Mara is over here, to show you that the excavation took place on the other side of the building along the Smith River. And today it's really lush and green back there. You can go back there and poke around. I guess you can. Bassett Mara will let you do that. They didn't run me off. This is the surveyor, Joe Yeaman, and as he described to me the process of surveying the area for the reservoir, he said, "You just didn't go where we went." I think they wore out like 3 international scouts, climbing hills and streams trying to get this survey done. They ran into bear and cougar, and they would go to the local country stores and tell people where they were going the next day, so the moonshiners would know they were coming and what they were doing, and they wouldn't get shot. He said it was beautiful. The wild was wild. It took a lot of time and effort, and they had to dangle over the water and do all kinds of things. It was very dangerous, but very interesting. One thing that Joe did for us is he gave us some maps from 1934 and 35 of Henry County, Patrick County, and Franklin County. And I chose this one not because that's where I live, but because look, there's no lakes. This is before Smith Mountain Lake, and this is before Philpott Lake. And these maps are in the book, but they're really small. If you want to see them in their big drafting form, the West Piedmont Planning District Commission has scanned them all, and for the cost of running the paper, they will sell you these maps. This is Shady Rest Cemetery, where the graves were moved. There are a lot of stones that are unknown. I'm not really sure how that happened, but I would imagine the business of moving people out of family graves could get a little confusing. And this is Miss Louise Mabry sitting up here in the second row. She responded to my ad in the paper and said, "Would you be interested in hearing about my family? Her father drowned when she was 8 years old in Nicholas Creek because of a flash flood." So the story of that is included in the book. Miss Mabry, that's her when she's little, by the way, right there in the corner. She had a lot of family photos that she shared with us, and she actually drew me a map of what it looked like under the lake in the area that she lived. Hers was one of the families that had to move to higher ground a couple of times during the construction of the lake. And then there's Miss Hazel Hale back here. Hazel and her husband Roy let me come to their house a lot of times, and we had a few adventures. And Hazel has hundreds of photo albums from the time she was a girl until now, and people have given her old photos. And she trusted me with her precious photo album so that I could sort of put the story together. And she even posed for pictures, which was a really good sport to do that. This is one of her, I guess, a great uncle. Hazel, is it your great uncle, Grover Carter? Uncle? Yeah. Grover Carter, and he was featured in the Martinsville Bulletin because he lost an arm in the Jameson Mill, and then he lost the other arm in a hunting accident. And he went on to have a career, to drive a truck, to write, to be an electrician. He did many things because he let his friends and family serve as his arms. He would tell them how to do things, and they would do it for him. And this is in 1973, and at that time he had 8 children, 17 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. And he actually saved one of them from drowning by pushing off from a rock and dragging them to shore. So who knows? If he can do that, we can do anything, can't we? And this is Hazel now. Hazel has her own book called Jameson Mill Memories, and it's fascinating. It too is very reasonably priced. Her family was the Jameson Mill. The miller at Jameson Mill is a direct descendant. She's a direct descendant. This top picture, she's standing on that bridge at Jameson Mill Park, and Nicholas Creek has totally inundated the area, which is important to know that we still get areas flooded, and with this weather we're having right now, particularly, we have this reservoir, but we still have issues. And there she is standing by her family home place. As you can see, the lake is right here. She and her husband Roy got permission to go in there and kind of clean around that and keep that sort of where people can go and see the smokestack from the old family hearth. So I didn't put these guys' pictures up here because I knew they'd be sitting here in the front row. But everybody knows Rocky Rockwell, and if you don't, he's sitting right here. And he is the commandant of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And he was going to come and he was going to move to Philpott and stay a couple of years and let this be his last job before retirement. And how many years has it been now, Rocky? 7. He fell in love with the place just as I did. I'm imported as well, but this is God's country if there ever was. And Rocky explains in the book how the dam has many purposes beyond just having a reservoir. It's holding back the water, it's generating electricity, it's creating tourism, it gives recreational opportunities for people who want to fish and boat and kayak. There's a lot of good things about the lake. And then all the little parks around the lake have their own personalities. So when Rocky got here, the lake wasn't being used as much as he thought it should be. And so he was explaining to me that it was the best kept secret, but that was not really a good business model. So he set upon letting people know about this diamond we have here in our area. And you know, there's always that balance of wanting people to use it, but not wanting people to abuse it. So that's where the Dan River Basin Association comes in, because that organization and Friends of Philpott and many, many volunteers work to keep the lake clean and to introduce new people to the lake. I have an inflatable kayak in my car, and I'm always bringing people out and saying, isn't this neat? We didn't see a boat all day. We're going around the edges and seeing all the beautiful flora and fauna, and I just think it's the most beautiful place. And then there's Dan Pratt, and his interest, he does talks on Fairdale, which was the town under Ferrystone Park, and as you know, these lakes butt up against each other. It's really interesting how it does that. But he talks about the town, there was a thriving town under Ferrystone Lake, and we have a chapter about that in the book. So we have an interview with Dan, who talks about how he first got interested. And like me, he's always interested in talking to people who know more than he does on the subject so that we can expand our knowledge. The Philpott family could have their own book. They could, we all know that. But they had more skin in the game than anybody. They had the most land that had to be given up for the project. Many family stories about surviving in hard times, about moonshining. They have had many leaders in their family, A.L. Philpott, that have left a mark on the state. I included this picture because, whoops, I'll learn how to use this by the time I'm finished here. This was recently torn down. And this is the old Philpott store and post office, correct?
It's a stolen, I burned it down about a month ago.
So
People got to.
it wasn't looking too good, was it? So I wanted to make sure to put that in there, and it's in the book because it's gone. And this is a Philpott descendant here with her chickens sitting at the rail depot, and the chickens are getting ready to go to Roanoke. The Philpotts have many stories about the wars and how the soldiers would get on the train at Philpott and go to Roanoke and on to their destinations. A lot of stories about people living really hard, rough lives. A lot of fun stories. The family is still very close. They have a website and they have annual reunions. But that could be a book in itself. This is one of my favorite things in the whole book. We had legal distilleries around here up until the time of Prohibition. And in fact, our people said, we don't want Prohibition. So when it came, the distilleries were saying, whoops, come and get your share, for medicinal purposes, get a 10-year supply because you're not going to be able to buy this. And the DeHart Distillery was a legal distillery, and there were two brothers, and they sort of competed with each other. So you have pictures of beautiful labels on these jars because they tried to outdo each other. And then they messed around with the proof. Well, mine's a little stronger, mine's a little stronger, mine's a little stronger. And then the price, they fiddled with the price. So 1 month, one guy's would be in demand, and the next month, the other guys would be in demand. But this is marketing at its best. Make hay while the sun shines, get your 10-year supply of corn liquor for medicinal purposes. When I moved on my farm in Snow Creek, there were all these glass jars in the shed, and I didn't know what they were, and I used them for weed killer. It was probably really good corn, but I wanted the blue jars, so. Well, let me go back a little bit on this moonshine economy. In the book is a story of Morris Stevenson, and most of you probably know Morris. He covered the stills, the bust and all for years and years and years for the Franklin News Post. And he was one of those lucky fellas that on his first story, he went out with ABC agents, and one of them happened to be from his hometown. So he pulled this little reporter aside and he said, look, this is how this works. And whenever there was going to be a bust, they would call him first. He could have alerted moonshiners, but he didn't. And he would go out with them. So he actually has a book called A Night of Making Liquor because the moonshiners came to trust him so much, they invited him one night while they made it, and he actually helped with the process. So his book is fascinating as well. Then there's an interview with a man named B.K. Hodges who ran moonshine for years, and he said the money was in hauling it, not making it. And he told me how they would stop in Roanoke and then stop in Richmond and stop in D.C. and go up to New York and then come back down and get some more and do the same thing. And he used a half-ton truck and put a bunch of hay and stuff on it, and nobody ever, the last thing he said is, you going to put this in the book? I said, sure. And he said, I've never been caught. So now everybody knows what he did in the book. So he said, go ahead, but he's in his late 80s, so I guess he's going to be risky now. But the word economy in here is very important because moonshine was very important to this area in the Great Depression, and some families survived on making moonshine. And in the book, I explain how they used to make it in the old days without the sugar, by letting the corn kernels germinate along the stream, and what a process that was. There were a lot of people that were hurt by moonshine. I don't want to paint just a rosy picture of it. There were car accidents, there were shootouts, there were people getting scalded from the water in the vats, but still it's part of our heritage. In fact, last year, we wanted to come up with a unique fundraiser for United Way that sort of embraced our heritage. So we had a moonshine tasting, and we made $32,000 in 4 hours. So guess what we're doing again this year? April 22, 23, come to Rocky Mount. It's at the Early Inn out there under the stars, and we're going to have a hootenanny. We had moonshiners sitting around, Cecil Love, some of his friends sitting around a campfire talking, and then we invited the revenuers to come too. So we were halfway through this evening of sipping this moonshine when Cecil Love turns to the guy and he says, "Aren't you that SOB that arrested me?" I thought we were going to have a fist fight, but it turned out to be a lovely evening, and they ended up telling a lot of tales, and people were very fascinated with their stories. So the moonshine economy is going to help United Way of Franklin County this year. And you know, there's still modern day bust in our community. I work in the Rakes building in Rocky Mount, where the Operation Lightning Strike was in the basement. My landlord is back here, and there's still 2 pillars in the building with antique cars under them where they burned, and they just left them to hold up the building. So you can find a lot of cool stuff. And it's not in this book, and I wish I had known before we printed it. There's a place called Millbrook in West Virginia where moonshiners were sent during the winter to if they were caught, that was jail. No guns, no clubs, it was just minimum security. And the men would make crafts and sell them and send the money home to their families. I had a lady approach me last week, and she has her father's trunk from Millbrook. And it has leather bags that he carved, it has wooden toys, has this funny cigarette mule thing where you put the pack in and the cigarette comes out the thing's rear end and then it strikes a match. I don't know, but that's quite a contraption there. But these things are going to be on display at the Franklin County Historical Society as soon as they get them set up. So you'll have to check that out. Really, really cool stuff. So I'm in love with this lake. It does great things for us. It's pristine, it's beautiful, it's natural. You can be out there all day and not see a home. The motorboaters are very respectful. People still fish there. I go some days when I'm having a really stressful day at work. I go out there and blow up my kayak and get on the water, and it keeps me calm, and I can do my job the next day. And I want to say a word about Darba. I had added a slide here, but it didn't get in the presentation. The Dan River Basin Association has a huge territory. Philpott Lake is just a part of it. But the proceeds from this project are for this part of the river basin. They host cleanups, they have talks, they do education with the children. They have that program called Trout in the Classroom, where children raise fish from fry and learn to do that, and then they release them. So the result of this is we have some really great fishing here now, still. The waters are still clean, they're full of fish, and it's a good place for everybody. So at that point, I'll leave it with, if anybody has any questions or wants to clarify some of my assumptions or has something they want to share, we would love it.
How many families had to be moved? How many homes were under the water?
It was about 36. They were big farms though.
How many houses are still underwater?
Now that I don't know because I don't scuba dive, but I bet there are some under there. There are railroad tracks, there are all kinds of things under there.
They just had to cut so far up. They left everything.
It's deep, it's very deep in some places. What do you think it is at its deepest, Rocky?
Right now, it's deepest spot I've found about 170 feet.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Everybody market. How did they come up naming this property and
That's an easy one because they gave up the most land,
Yeah.
almost 500 acres.
so it was my great granddaddy's land that they gave up to
Mhm.
get that? My great granddaddy, that's my granddaddy.
Yes.
The question was asked about how many houses under the lake. I can only speak to one family. My grandparents had a farm that's underwater now, and it's either Deer Island or Turkey Island that is the top of that island. All of the buildings on their farm were torn down. The house, the barn, the corn cribs, the smokehouse were all gone. The last time we were in that area, and it was probably, I was a child, but it was about the time the water was beginning to back up. Nothing was left but the chimney to the house. Now, whether that would still be there, I don't know, but I know all the buildings were gone.
Okay, I got a question for you. About the steel remnants that's still up on top of Turkey Island. Turkey Island, I'm sorry.
The remnants?
Yeah.
I think one of the gentlemen that came to one of the Fairdale programs we had brought that up. I think it was the last one, what we like. We actually marked it on our K&Z. And as of yet, I haven't been able to go there to verify it. But he did say, I think it was, wasn't it a hotel that he said used to be there, or a little town in itself used to be there on Deer Island.
It was on top of Deer Island, but I don't remember, I don't remember on top of Turkey Island.
Maybe it was
I think it was Deer Island. It wasn't Turkey Island. But I haven't been able to go there to find the foundation or anything yet to verify that it was actually there.
Our Boy Scouts do cancel for all time. Hopefully they stay.
Have they looked for it?
Oh, they find it, they play it.
Oh, really? So it is there?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. I'll have to
So
go
we
there.
have to go over and run them off of.
Was it Helms? Was it Helms?
Yeah, I think it was.
And
Helms House. You lived there for a while, didn't you, Louise? Did you live in the Helms house? In the Harvey Helms house?
Oh, yeah, that's where we lived. It was,
After her father drowned, her mother, yeah. Mhm.
you were very, you were
There's a question way back there, Dr. Dorsey.
Who actually owns the dam? Does the Corps of Engineers own it, the county own it since they built a marina there, or who owns it?
The United States public owns the dam. The United States Army Corps of Engineers manages it for the public. The marina was built and is operated by Henry County for the Henry County residents.
But it's owned by the Corps of Engineers, by the public.
It's owned by the United States public,
Yeah.
managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. A lot of people get that wrong.
So is it treated like a national park? It's
It's
property of the people and maintained by,
exactly.
the Corps of Engineers built it.
Yeah, the
Right.
Corps of Engineers building does.
Is this considered a federal?
Yes.
Corporation park?
Yes.
Mhm.
No. No.
A lot of people think it's a Virginia State Park, but it's not.
No, it's a federal.
It had to be torn down. I don't have any pictures or verification of when it was torn down, but yeah, it was meant to be temporary. Hey, Dr. May.
The value of the property, it was purchased by the federal government, right? You know what the value they gave for it? What the
I think
people-
it, from what I could tell, it depended on the property. They, if they wanted someone to give them a larger piece, they were willing to give them more per acre because they wanted that whole piece.
Yeah,
But I don't have any idea cost per acre.
What kind of help was given the families that had to move? Was there any help in relocating and finding places for them?
I don't think so. They bought them what they call fair market value for the land and the home,
They were.
and they went to higher
Given
ground.
money then?
Yeah. Yes.
I talked to several Philpotts this morning as they were coming in. And I received tons of emails and phone calls, but one in particular, Mr. James J.H. Philpott, and he was reaching out to find out as much as he could about this, and also I sent that email to you. Maybe you could send your copy to
Okay.
I've got others.
Absolutely. Leanne?
Nancy, you mentioned at the beginning you were hoping people could help fill in some of the gaps. what are the biggest questions that you have after all this research and writing the book? And perhaps there are people in this audience that can help you fill in those gaps or connect you with others who might be able to do so.
I really would, I found that the more people I talked to, the more the picture became clear of what life was like. So I still want to know what life was like down there for the families that lived there. There were some tragedies. We know people drowned, that children were lost. We have stories of, I couldn't confirm all of these, so they're not in the book, but stories of people going under the Philpott Depot and drilling into the floor and tapping moonshine kegs that were getting ready to go north and emptying them out and plugging them back up. And I don't know if that's true or not, but somebody was very ingenious, and it might even be someone in this room that did that.
My dad said that D. Hart still is right over my house. He went across the blank that way, and one of them looked at and my dad said that they had 2 rooms down the other side of the road, and they would pop a line in there all the time, but they had a setting down there all the time for the tax folks. But they would have a few caves down the riverbank under the road, and get a little time, just a little bit.
I will say this, the people were very ingenious, very ingenious.
On the metal bridge, first off, back in 2013, I was taking an English class over here at the Pasadena. We had to, that was something we had to do. We had to go out and research and write a paper and Philpott Dam and the area up under it, moonshine and railroad tracks.
It's fascinating.
Very mind, and one of the guys said his father, or his grandfather, had pictures of him cutting that bridge up and adding that steel into the cement for the.
That was resourceful.
Yeah. Well, a couple of the guys that was in that class, their grandparents or grandfathers worked on the dam.
We wanted to tell the story while people still remembered firsthand something. In the book, we also have some receipts for mill work, for caskets, there's an order in here to build a still when it was still legal. The guy wanted a certain kind of copper, and so we have an order for that in the book. We have a stock certificate from the old Blue Ridge Yacht Club from the 50s. We have an application for widow's benefits from the Civil War from folks who lived in the area. Just really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, pictures of the homes where Joe lost family, Peggy, and everyone.
I don't know. I have pictures of homes with families in front of them, but I don't know who they belong to. It was just things that are at historical societies that folks couldn't identify. It might be fun to bring some of those pictures at another time and have people see if they can identify the people in the pictures.
I know that book that you have about certain
Mm-hmm.
yeah, pictures of mom and Joe. And it's not my head. Mom and Joe was sitting in the truck. Young kids.
There was a lot of young kids around, and 7 in one family, 6 in another.
I mean, you can tell that they were identical.
51 first cousins. Now you know why else got left dog.
And Miss Hazel tells the story of how there were a lot of Carters and they weren't all necessarily related. So the Carter kids from one hill would meet in the middle with the Carter kids from another hill, and they would play while the parents were conducting their business. But it sounded like mill time was a good time and harvest time was a good time for people to come together for fellowship. Of course, they came together to have a nip too, to check out each other's special blend of corn whiskey. But really, this was a delight to put together. I love talking to people. Folks brought me into their homes. They met me at the end of dirt roads with maps. I was totally confused at first, and then the picture got clearer and clearer, and made some really good friends. They're some of the nicest people. I'm imported from Chesapeake, but some of the nicest people live in this community.
Actually, it was rather interesting to go back to Fairdale. If you had any pictures of Fairdale itself, I have some of those.
Do you? You need to talk to this fella here.
Yeah.
Both of my grandfathers were born where there was water covered now. And in fact, they ran a post office in Fairdale at the time. They had a legal facility back in 1895. And the post office, there was about 67 houses in that picture. And that's all that consisted of Fairdale, about 6 or 7 houses.
And that's how the mail came in and went out, and people would come in and go out.
There was an iron bridge across the river. I got married in 1949. My pushed me off that bridge in the river in 1950.
Yeah, they had a fence, well, you could go across it with, they had some little boards up there.
Right.
Go across them.
Of course, there was some illegal bridges across the river. You cross that on the board.
Which one tasted better, the legal or the illegal?
My dad got married in 1914 and moved right up to Fairdale and we ran a stable for 2 years. My older sister was born
One of my grandfathers owned 5,000 acres. The reason Philpott gave the most land of anybody or had more involved in the project, they bought it just for the dam.
I don't know the man's name, but he was from Cincinnati and he was working for the government. And he would ride down the train down to Roanoke and he'd ride on down to Philpott. And he would come and stay over to my dad's house and over my dad. And he got used to that liquor, I can tell you that. He won't go anywhere else to stay. But he was in his survey on something, because this is before he started today.
Well, Joe's not here today to defend himself and say if it was him or not. Sir, could we get your last name before we get, what's your last name?
My last name's Cahill. The people that owned it, actually on the post office or whatever, Fairdale, they were Helmses.
Helmses. That name's very popular in that time period. I had a question back here.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment that there is a diorama of Fairdale, if that's historical center, a little small model of it. It's really cool to look at.
We have a chapter in the book about Fairdale, specifically about the Civilian Conservation Corps who built the cabins and worked in that area and what it was like to have lived in and worked, what you ate, how long you got to sleep, what your chores were. And they would pull folks off the job and they would fight fires around there was a big fire in Stewart and everybody was called out. And there's a little bit about that in there too. Was there another?
Did they ever have a problem with floating debris piling up against the dam, of the things that they had cut down, or did the water rise so slowly that it soaked it and you kept it?
That's a good question. I have a couple of pictures where you can see the debris backed up to the back of the dam. I don't know how you guys handled that, whether you fished it out on a regular basis or.
Wait till after this weekend, you'll see it happen again. It's mostly we let it sit there and eventually will settle. A lot of that stuff falls out before it gets in. If it gets really bad, we'll have to get some of it, but not very much. Mostly God takes care of it. In the early days, as the gentleman was saying, we only had, I think you said, we only had to cut the trees and the houses out down so far. If it was 100 foot below the surface, we just didn't mess with it. They're just, well, some of them are still there, but as they would pop to the surface, because, eventually some of them would come loose, and they got to the surface, they'd burn them. So I had this burning, floating house on a lake. So hard.
Now that I would like a picture of.
I mean, you guys are very useful, and y'all probably know the truth about it, but did somebody fall in and went ahead and into the city and they just covered it all?
I got one And he came back to work. Yeah, that's what
I couldn't find any records of anyone having been killed in the construction. That doesn't mean they don't exist. I just couldn't find it, not on the dam.
Killed in like the quarry,
Mhm.
and there was another gentleman that was killed when they were, in the conveyor belt that was taking the study.
They had a flooding down there where they're getting gravel and killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, three.
There are, Joe, you saying that brother Major was big.
Yeah. So this lake is actually older than Smith Mountain Lake. They're having their 50th anniversary. So I guess,
It was finished in 53, wasn't it?
Well, the lake was finished in 51, powerhouse was finished in 53. The dam was finished in 51 and built, and then the powerhouse was finished 2 years later. And Smith Mountain dam was built, it was the same authorization that authorized both dams.
they're celebrating their 50th in 2016.
I didn't know that was that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
She had her hand up first.
I want to know where the book is going to be sold.
Oh, that's easy. We have some outside in the lobby. We'll be out there after the talk because they have to get this room ready for another show. And again, they're $10 and the proceeds go to the Dan River Basin Association.
But will there be an ongoing place that you keep?
You can get them on Amazon, and Tom Perry's website, Free State of Patrick, is really the better place to buy them if you want more proceeds to go to Dan River Basin Association. Free State of Patrick, Laurel Hill Publishing. And that's the gentleman back there in the white shirt. Anything else?
You mentioned the way the river is used for recreation today. Back in those days, it was used for recreation too. But I can remember as a child being wagged along the men folks Saturday evening in the summertime, there was singing and fish fries.
A seinen is where you drag the net across and catch the fish, and then you toss them out on the shore and have a fish
I don't know
fry.
what the women did for recreation in the summertime.
They were busy canning and doing all that. Thanks, guys. I think we need to give the room back now. I really appreciate everybody coming. Thank you so much.